I think the question is whether or not the result of accumulating so much debt so rapidly will be a gradual one or a sudden cataclysmic one. If it's gradual, what happens is we inflate our way out of this. And so the government continues to buy the debt and the consumer pays the price through inflation. I think this is what is going on, and it's important that we translate the message because some people at home are like, what's a trillion? What's 10 trillion? I can't fathom these numbers. And what does it mean to me? Government keeps running debts and I still keep doing okay. But what's happening is the people on the margins aren't doing okay. The people who have limited income, the people who have fixed income are getting squeezed as prices rise. So I think the people in office need to connect the dots for people. We need to connect the dots that the debt is related to rising prices. It's related to your standard of living, and your lack of ability to stay up and to get ahead is from inflation that's linked to the debt. But there's another possibility, and this worries me as well. And the other possibility is that you have a cataclysmic event, that you have it a day or a week or a bond sale where nobody shows up to buy the bonds. And so instead of having to pay 4% for the 10-year bond, all of a sudden it's 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 or 20. If you have a cataclysmic rise or a cataclysmic loss of enthusiasm for purchasing the bonds, I think at some point you can have something that makes this an untenable situation. So we're handling $1 trillion in interest, but it's squeezing out other things. But what if it's all of a sudden within a year, $2 trillion in interest? And people say, well, that could never happen. Well, when I first got out of medical school and was buying a house, I paid 11% for interest. So they can be higher. And there are many times in our history, if the government debt has to be paid for at 10 or 11%, we are talking about something that may well be beyond what government can do without significant inflation.
You talk about how, people are saying $2 trillion a year is never going to happen. I want to remind the audience that in 2010, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, he said when he was asked what is the single biggest threat to our national security, he said it's our debt. Now, that sounds concerning, but that was back in 2010. In 2010, debt was less than half what it is today. The debt to GDP ratio was 91%. Today's 125%. And the interest payment has gone up 6-fold since then. So if it was a threat to national security back then, back in 2010, 15 years ago, what would you call it today? A bigger threat to national security?
Well, I think what you look at is that no matter which administration, Republican or debt, the debt keeps piling on, whether it's Republican or Democrat. And I think that for the most part, Democrats are not concerned with debt, and they'll tell you that. They believe in this modern monetary theory where we will just borrow and spend ourselves into prosperity. Republicans pretend to care about the debt, but don't really care about the debt. They care about it when they go home to speak to the Rotary or the Lions Club or the Chamber. They tell people how they care and they are conservative, but then they're in Washington, they vote for all the spending. The other thing that this illustrates, because both parties keep adding it on, is that you have to look at a broader swath of spending. You can't say, well, I'm just going to fix fraud and abuse in the Medicaid program, and that'll be enough. Unless you look at every program in government, it's an extraordinary bite that you have to take of individual programs. That's why I've always promoted this idea of the penny plan. When I first started promoting it, it was simply a freeze in all spending led to a balance within 5 years. But then as the government continued to grow, it became a penny plan, a 1% cut. Then it became the nickel plan. Then we had the pandemic and it became the 6-penny plan. But that's essentially what it would take now is a 6% cut, but not just of Medicaid or of one program, a 6% cut of everything. And people say, oh, how dramatic would that be? How would you do it? How would you cut 6% without hurting the poorest among us for Social Security and Medicare? I said, well, you'd have to means test this. You could cut 6% of Medicare and Social Security if you simply means tested it. The richer would get a lot less, and we'd just acknowledge that Social Security is short of money, and they would take a lot less. And we would have to raise the age gradually. And people aren't ready for this, but people say it's a third rail. The president tells me over and over, it's a third rail. You can't talk about Social Security. And yet, I've been talking about it since I was first elected. I told the people in Kentucky, It's not that I hate old people. In fact, I aspire to be an old person. But the thing is somebody has to do something. If you want to save Social Security for yourself or for somebody else, you have to raise the age. It's just without question, you have to do that. You, in all likelihood, have to means test the benefits. But I forced a vote on this in December. The vice president came back to oppose me. The president opposed me. They said we need to expand Social Security to help people who have government jobs and non-government jobs. We're going to expand Social Security by $100 billion. Well, why would you expand Social Security when Social Security is already going bankrupt? Why would you expand their payments and say, oh, we're going to take care of even more? So I proposed they pay for it by gradually raising the age over 10 years to 70, and I was one of 3 votes. 3 votes to raise the age and 97 not. But this gives you an idea of the political obstacles to trying to fix any of these problems.
Before going to what got us here, because I think it's a problem of both the left and the right, and I think it's a systemic problem that we're going to dig into. Senator Johnson talked about it a few days ago in an interview as well. It's a fascinating interview. I think it was on the All In podcast interview. But before doing that, I want to talk about the 3 possible scenarios where we could end up. You talked about one of them, which is deflating the currency. The dollar's already down 10% so far this year. That's the worst start of a year in 5 decades. Bond yields have gone up from 3.8 to 4.5%. So it seems very gradual. Now, that's option 1. Now, Ray, again, I'm going to refer back to Ray Dalio. You talked about 2 other possible scenarios. Number 2 is domestic unrest. People stop trusting the institution, populist movement. And a third one, which is war, something people don't like to talk about, but that forces the government to essentially distract the voters away from domestic problem, rally the nationalistic sentiment, and rally the economy as well. Now, this is more long-term discussion, looking at historically what's happened to other empires falling or when a country's or an empire or country's heavily indebted. What do you think of these 3 scenarios? Is there any other scenarios? And scenario 2 and 3 seem pretty pessimistic, but are there something that should be discussed at this stage?
Yeah, I don't know if people consciously go to war to escape domestic problems. Does it happen? Sure. Is there always a danger of getting more involved in war? Sure there is. I mean, the dangers now, there's a danger of being involved more with the Israel and Iran war. There's danger of being involved more with the Russia and Ukraine war as well. And I think continuing to speak about directing our attention towards our domestic problems and knowing that we don't have enough money. I tell people, look, yeah, sure, Russia was the aggressor. Russia invaded Ukraine. All of the moral arguments are for Ukraine. But what about the argument that in order to fight a war, in order for us to fund a war and to arm Ukraine, we have to borrow the money from China to fund Ukraine? It's the same sort of thing if people say, well, what about the poor people in sub-Saharan Africa? Don't you care? Why don't we help them? I say, well, you can help them if you have a surplus, but we would have to go to the bank to borrow. And to me, it's sort of the equivalent of you're walking down the street and you make $25,000 a year and you can barely pay your rent and you have no extra money, and you see a homeless person and you have a great deal of sympathy and you say, well, gosh, I should go to the first bank and borrow $1,000 to give to the homeless person. Nobody thinks that way. But essentially, that's what we are now. We're full of a lot of people on both sides of the aisle with a great deal of sympathy. The hawks want to fund war. The left wants to fund welfare, the warfare welfare state. And what we're stuck with is people that just are putting us further and further into debt. In fact, the big, what I call not so beautiful bill was really not so much about, the tax cuts. That was a big part of it. But a lot of it was a way to get around the military caps. These were the hawks who said, we want more money for the military. This is how we can do it without giving more welfare for the Democrats. We'll get more warfare. And then we'll also have a ton of money plowed into a standing army that we're going to hire for the Customs and Border Patrol. And it was really a spending bill. In the end, the bill spent over $500 billion in new money. And then they're surprised that it actually will add to the deficit. Literally, there was $500 billion or more in new spending in that bill. And, none of it really offset in the first 5 years. Even the most optimistic estimates from the authors of the bill were that it would add about $500 billion to the debt in the first 5 years. And that's with an optimistic estimate. The CBO predicted even more.